When Jamal Hayes pulled up to his construction site, he had no idea it would turn into more than just a day at work. A group of local men, familiar with his reputation but ignorant of who really owned the land, showed up to put him in his place. Their brutal hostility was only the beginning. What happened next will shock even the most seasoned. But let's start from the beginning. Early morning sunlight bathed the construction site in golden hues as 42-year-old Jamal Hayes, a black entrepreneur and owner of Hayes Construction, pulled up in his sleek black pickup truck. The contrast between his polished vehicle and the dusty, rugged machinery surrounding it was striking, but it suited Jamal perfectly. His strong build, exuding the quiet confidence of a man who had worked hard to get where he was, only added to the aura of authority he carried. He stepped out of the truck in a sharp, tailored suit, the kind of suit that reflected the precision and ambition behind his success. The dust in the air seemed to settle around him like a halo, as if even the elements knew to respect his presence. Jamal had built Hayes Construction from the ground up, literally and figuratively, starting with just a few tools and a big dream. Today, his company was a cornerstone of the community, providing jobs, building homes, and giving back to the neighborhoods he grew up in. However, something felt off today. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air that he couldn't shake. As he approached the site, he spotted Peter, the site foreman, a white man in his late 50s, engaged in a heated argument with a group of local men. The men, dressed in faded overalls and worn work boots, had gathered in a semicircle around Peter. Their voices were low, but Jamal could hear the unmistakable venom in their words. One of the men, his sun-worn face twisted in anger, spat on the ground. "This land's got no place for you," he sneered, his eyes narrowing with contempt. "You don't belong here." Jamal's jaw tightened at the familiar sound of hate and ignorance. He'd seen these men before. Local troublemakers who often clung to outdated prejudices, believing they had a say in who could and couldn't build in their town. They had been vocal against changes to the landscape of the town, railing against the new housing projects and developments that Jamal was spearheading. They feared change, and feared men like Jamal, who weren't supposed to rise above their place in a town that had long been divided along racial and economic lines. Watching from the truck, Jamal's mind raced. Today, they had crossed a line. He hadn't expected this level of hostility. Not today, not on his project. His company's success had made waves, but it also made enemies. He could feel the heat of the morning sun on his neck, but his body remained calm, steady. With a controlled breath, Jamal opened the door and stepped onto the gravel. His polished shoes crunched underfoot, the sound purposeful, like a signal that he was ready to take control of the situation. The men turned their attention to him instantly, and one of them, a burly man with a thick beard, stepped forward. "You're trespassing," the man barked, his chest puffing out as if he was trying to intimidate Jamal into submission. "This is private property." Jamal didn't flinch. He smiled, a calm, firm smile that spoke volumes. "Actually, this land is owned by Hayes Construction," he replied, unfazed. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the deed, and held it up for them to see. "So if anyone's trespassing, it's you." The men froze, their bravado faltering as Jamal's words hit their target. The initial shock registered on their faces, and for a brief moment, the tension in the air thickened, like a storm waiting to break. One of the men, his sun-worn skin pulled tight over his gaunt features, hissed between clenched teeth, "Lies. This can't be yours." Jamal's stance didn't waver. His posture was tall and unyielding, every inch of him exuding authority. "Why?" he asked, his voice sharp and cutting through the rising hostility. "Because I'm black?" The group exchanged uneasy glances, the words hanging in the air like smoke. Jamal's pointed question had struck a nerve, and it was clear they weren't used to being confronted in such a manner. They were unaccustomed to seeing black men in positions of power and ownership, especially one who dared to stand his ground so decisively. Then, one of the men, Jake, stepped forward. His bulk seemed to fill the space, his chest puffed out in defiance. "We ain't gonna let you take over what's ours," he sneered, his voice low and guttural, laced with something darker. "We'll do whatever it takes." Jamal's expression remained calm, his eyes steady, though the words stung more than he let on. He had dealt with men like Jake before, men who thought they could claim ownership of more than just land, men who still believed that the world worked in their favor simply because of their race. Peter, the foreman, looked increasingly uncomfortable, trying to intervene with what seemed like feeble words. "Guys, let's calm down. This isn't the way." But Jake shoved Peter aside with a dismissive grunt, the older man stumbling back, clearly surprised by the aggression. Jake's attention snapped back to Jamal, and his voice grew colder, more hostile. "This is our town, our land," he spat. "People like you don't get to call the shots." Jamal's calm facade cracked for just a moment. His eyes flared, dark with fury. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous level. "This land hasn't been yours for decades," he said, his words sharp, each syllable measured. "My team and I are building affordable housing for families in need. You don't like it? Take it up with the law." It was a line that crossed the boundary of mere confrontation. The words left Jamal's mouth like a statement of fact, a challenge to their very sense of entitlement. He wasn't about to back down from a fight. Not today. Just as the tension was about to break wide open, one of the men, quiet up until now, pulled out a can of spray paint and aimed it at the construction vehicles nearby. The sight of the paint, glinting in the morning sunlight, made Jamal's heart skip a beat. It was an act of vandalism, a desperate show of defiance against something they didn't understand. Before Jamal could react, Peter lunged forward, grabbing the man's arm and jerking it back with surprising strength. "Enough!" Peter roared, his voice carrying across the site, echoing off the steel beams and machinery. It was the first time Jamal had seen Peter lose control, and it was clear that even the foreman, though uncomfortable, was no longer willing to tolerate their actions. The man with the spray paint struggled in Peter's grip, but the damage had already been done. The scene had escalated quickly, and Jamal knew this wasn't going to end easily. He tightened his jaw, preparing for whatever came next. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Peter had called the police during the scuffle. When officers arrived, the group's leader, Jake, quickly spun a tale of victimhood. "This guy," he pointed at Jamal, "is trying to take our land. He doesn't belong here." But Jamal stood tall, presenting his documents to the officers. "I own this land," he stated calmly. "I'm also a registered contractor, with all the necessary permits." The officers reviewed the paperwork, their expressions shifting. "It's all legitimate," one officer confirmed, turning to the group. "You're the ones trespassing." Jake blustered, but the evidence was undeniable. As the group was escorted away, one man muttered, "This ain't over." Peter patted Jamal on the back. "You handled that better than I would have. Proud to work with you." Days later, the story spread across social media after Jamal's crew posted footage of the confrontation. Outrage over the group's behavior and admiration for Jamal's composure poured in. Local activists rallied behind Jamal, organizing a community event to support his construction project. Jake and his crew faced legal repercussions for their actions, their reputations tarnished. Meanwhile, Jamal's company gained new investors, inspired by his vision for inclusive development. As Jamal stood at the site's groundbreaking ceremony, surrounded by cheering families and supporters, he addressed the crowd. This project is about more than housing. It's about building bridges in our community. Together, we're proving that hate has no place here. The crowd erupted in applause as Jamal raised a shovel, breaking ground not just for the project, but for a brighter, united future.